Ghosts of the Heartland, 5 haunted places in Iowa, what the dead leave behind. Before we go any further, before you hear about the axe that swung in the dark, the shadow with glowing red eyes, or the invisible hands that grabbed a man's hair in a pitch-black basement, I want to tell you what all of these stories add up to. Iowa is not a place most people associate with horror. It's cornfields and county fairs and wide-open sky. But underneath that postcard image lies something else entirely. Across 5 locations scattered from Council Bluffs to Bentonsport, ordinary people have walked into old buildings and walked out shaken to their core, not because they read something frightening, not because someone told them a campfire tale, but because they felt something. They heard footsteps where no one walked. They were touched by hands that weren't there. They woke in the night to faces that shouldn't exist. What connects these 5 places is a pattern that's hard to ignore. Every single one of them was a site of intense human suffering, mass murder, institutional confinement, disease, isolation, violent death. And every single one of them now produces experiences that defy easy explanation. Whether you believe these are literal ghosts, psychological echoes, or some strange interplay between traumatized architecture and the human mind, one thing is certain. The past in these places is not past. It bleeds through, it lingers, it reaches out. These stories aren't urban legends passed through 10 layers of telephone. These are first-hand accounts, told by the people who were there, in the room, in the dark, when something answered back. So turn down the lights and listen. 1. The House That Never Forgot, Villisca. It's a warm June night in 1912 in Villisca, a small town in southwest Iowa. Josiah and Sarah Moore have just come home from a Children's Day program at the Presbyterian Church with their 4 kids. 2 neighborhood girls, Lena and Ina Stillinger, are sleeping over. The house is full of life, but someone is already inside, hiding in the attic, crouched in the suffocating dark, waiting for the house to go quiet. By morning, all 8 people, 6 of them children, are dead, bludgeoned in their beds with an axe that belonged to the family. The killer covered every mirror with bed sheets, left oil lamps burning, and stayed inside the house among the bodies for hours before vanishing. No one was ever convicted. Over a century later, the house at 508 East 2nd Street still stands, and people who spend the night there don't sleep well. One visitor named Parker Anderson went for his 18th birthday. The group stopped at Casey's for snacks, laughing and joking on the drive down. But the mood changed the instant they stepped inside. In the attic, that same cramped space where the killer waited, they heard metal scraping against metal in the dark. There was nothing there to make the sound. Other visitors report hearing children whispering and crying in the bedrooms. Shadows move on their own. And one overnight investigator was suddenly overcome with uncontrollable weeping, deep racking sobs that had no cognitive trigger, no emotional cause they could name. It came from the house itself, as though the grief of 1912 had soaked into the walls and was pouring back out through anyone open enough to feel it. They call it the stone tape theory, the idea that extreme trauma can imprint itself onto a physical environment like a recording. At Villisca, the tape never stopped playing. 2. The Thing in the Boiler Room, Farrar Elementary School. Drive out to the farming country near Maxwell, Iowa, and you'll find an old schoolhouse sitting in the middle of nowhere. Farrar Elementary closed its doors in 2006 and was bought by Jim and Nancy Oliver, who found it almost perfectly preserved. Student desks still in rows, pull-down maps hanging above chalkboards, antique books on the shelves. There was no mass murder here, no documented tragedy, just decades of children, laughing, crying, learning, growing up, pouring their energy into these walls. And somehow that was enough. J.D. Campbell, founder of Paranormal Seekers of Iowa, investigated Farrar 18 separate times. He watched heavy classroom doors slam shut by themselves. He saw wooden boards hurled down empty hallways, landing directly behind his team. But the story that keeps people up at night happened to a lone investigator in the basement boiler room. He was working alone when he saw it. A massive shadow figure, nearly 7 feet tall, looming in the tunnel. It had dark red glowing eyes. The investigator didn't run. He held his ground and stared directly at the thing for 2 solid minutes, locked in a silent standoff. The shadow stared back. Then it flew upward and stuck to the ceiling. And for 1 split second, it changed. The enormous, terrifying mass dissolved into the clear image of a frail, feeble old man, revealing that the monster was a disguise, a projected illusion designed to frighten. That detail haunts researchers, because it implies the entity was thinking. It chose to look terrifying. It wanted to scare him. And when the trick didn't work, it showed its true face. Other teams have heard a deep male voice commanding them to get out. They've heard children playing in empty rooms and a woman singing from the old kitchen. 3 separate, unconnected groups all identified her by the same name, a former school cook. None of them had spoken to each other. 3. The Jester in the Dark, Edinburgh Manor. If Farrar is unsettling, Edinburgh Manor is something else entirely. Located in Jones County near Monticello, this building started life in 1850 as a state-run poor farm, a place for the destitute, the elderly, and the incurably insane. The current structure was built in 1910 and operated as an asylum for exactly 100 years before it was abruptly shut down in 2010. When the doors closed, they left everything behind: medical records, patient files, personal belongings. All of it abandoned in place. 100 years of institutionalized suffering, sealed inside a crumbling building. And something down in the basement doesn't want visitors. Investigators call it the Jester. Paranormal researcher Logan Coppice brought his team for an overnight stay and barely made it through the night. In the basement, one of his teammates felt an invisible hand grab a fistful of his hair and yanked. Others have felt heavy phantom hands pressing down on their shoulders, accompanied by screams echoing from corridors that should be empty. But the most disturbing story involves a specific bed in one of the old patient wards. For decades, people have whispered that if you lie on it, something will push down on your chest. Coppice's team decided to test it. The first man who lay down was immediately hit with a savage panic attack, crushing shortness of breath, a racing heart. He fled the room. The second man, exhausted, eventually fell asleep on the same bed. His friends left him alone as a joke. 30 minutes later, he came sprinting back, white-faced and terrified. He'd woken to find a dark, shadowy figure crouched at the foot of the bed, slowly rising to peer over the edge of the mattress with a pair of glowing, malevolent eyes staring directly into his. At Edinburgh Manor, the activity doesn't just startle you. It makes you fear for your physical safety. 4. The cage that holds them still, the Squirrel Cage Jail. In Council Bluffs sits one of the strangest buildings in America. The Pottawatomie County Squirrel Cage Jail, built in 1885, is one of only 3 remaining rotary jails in the country, and the only one ever built with 3 full stories. The cells are pie-shaped, arranged around a massive iron cylinder that rotates by hand crank, aligning one cell at a time with a single exit door. It took 5 minutes to turn the whole thing once. When it opened, locals called it Hotel Guitar because the cells had indoor plumbing. But living inside was psychologically devastating. The constant grinding rotation, the disorienting lack of corners, the total sensory isolation. Prisoners scratched their names into the iron. Those marks are still there. So are the ghosts. Bill Foster, a jailer in the 1950s, planned to live on the 4th floor. Night after night, he heard heavy boots pacing above him, rhythmic, deliberate, relentless, on a level he knew was empty and locked. It got so bad he moved downstairs to sleep on the prisoner floor. He preferred the company of inmates to whatever was walking overhead. Modern investigators have documented floating electromagnetic readings drifting through the library with no source. Visitors smell sulfur that appears from nowhere, accompanied by the thundering sound of horses galloping. A sensory flashback to the 1880s. Ghost cats wander the halls, remnants of the pets kept by jailers' families who once lived in the attached quarters. And then there's the little girl. Tour groups see her locked inside one of the pie-shaped cells, a full-bodied apparition radiating overwhelming sadness. Visitors feel sharp tugs on their clothing, the unmistakable gesture of a small child trying to get an adult's attention. Her voice echoes through the cold metallic corridors. No one knows who she was. 5. The inn where no one checks out, Mason House Inn. On the banks of the Des Moines River in Bentonsport sits the Mason House Inn, built in 1846 to serve the steamboat trade. Over nearly 2 centuries, this massive Georgian building has been a hotel, a waypoint on the Mormon Trail, a Civil War field hospital, and a diphtheria clinic where a doctor treated dozens of dying patients before dying of the disease himself. 3 of its owners died inside its walls. At least one guest was murdered there. The current owners run it as a bed and breakfast. They have one rule for paranormal investigators: no Ouija boards, no homemade spirit boxes. They don't want to provoke the large community of spirits that already lives there. Room 5 is where things get physical. One guest woke in the middle of the night to find a large, fully materialized man standing beside his bed, pacing and shouting in muffled, unintelligible words. Then the guest felt something crush down on his chest, pinning him to the mattress. The apparition teleported, one instant on his left, the next on his right, before vanishing. In that same room, another man felt sharp tugs on his pajamas. He assumed it was his wife asking him to roll over. He tried to move his arm and couldn't. It was completely paralyzed. When he finally broke free, he realized his wife hadn't come on the trip. He was alone, but something was still pulling at his clothes. The owners say that's George, a little boy whose ghost wanders the staircase landing. Room 7 is worse. A traveler named Knapp was stabbed to death there in the 1800s. Guests hear his boots pacing the floorboards in the empty room. People walking past have looked inside and seen the shape of a body pressed into the mattress. A man who has been trying to go to sleep for over 150. And in room 8, someone once saw a disembodied head floating in midair. The owners aren't afraid. They live alongside their ghosts. Fanny Mason Kurtz, the last Mason to own the house, died quietly by the fireplace in 1951. Guests still see her sitting there, exactly where she was when her heart stopped, content, at home, and apparently with no intention of ever leaving. Iowa remembers everything. The question is whether you're ready to listen.